Good evening, everybody. I'm glad you were able to join us. I am very, very honored to be able to present once again one of our illustrious congregants, Dr. Martin Schlesselberg, who is a critical care and pulmonary specialist at the very front lines of the COVID-19 fight, trying to get people cured from this horrible disease. Dr. Schlesselberg, aside from being a doctor, is also a lawyer, also a bassoonist, or at least he used to be. And he's written music, and he has a drone and takes wonderful pictures. So he's a multi-talented person, and we're very, very lucky to have him tonight to explain to us where we are with COVID-19. So Dr. Schlesselberg.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Martin Schlesselberg. I'm an assistant clinical professor at the UCR School of Medicine. I went to the Johns Hopkins Medical Program 5 years. I did my residency at the Johns Hopkins Medical Institutions. During that time, I became interested in the bone marrow transplant unit, where patients were dying from cytomegalovirus infections. That's a very long word, but that is a viral pneumonia. And so my early interest in pulmonary medicine was with viral pneumonias. I went on to take a pulmonary and critical care fellowship at UCSD Medical Center under Dr. Ken Mosier and some other many amazing people. And during that time, we had the AIDS epidemic, and I became an AIDS researcher studying that virus along with cytomegalovirus's role. I am also a licensed attorney in the state of California. The timing for this talk could not be more appropriately timed, because we are in for an amazing winter, the likes of which I don't think we have ever seen in our lifetimes. I will start off by saying that now is the winter of our discontent. That is from William Shakespeare. So you may recognize this. This is taken from the Johns Hopkins website, a site that I go to almost on a daily basis to look for trends. You can see that as of this past weekend, there were 62 million global cases. Now I want you to just sit back for a second and realize the enormity of those numbers. 62 million people contracted and 1.5 million, right there, deaths. 1.5 million deaths. 250,000 in the United States, followed by Brazil and India. And this map, and I urge you to go to this site, will show you where it is most active right now. I have it on active cases, and you will see that it's flared up in the United States and Mexico, where we all live, and in Europe. You'll see that it's also lights up in India and Japan and parts of South America. In fact, the only safe place to live right now would be Antarctica, but I don't know anyone that's visiting there. So I want to take you through some numbers and charts. And if you're the type of person that doesn't like numbers and charts, then go out for a pizza, or, well, maybe you get one delivered home by Grubhub, but take a break. But these are things that I look at every day, because these actually tell me the future. And you will be informed of what the future will look at if you'll just take a little time and share this with me. So on May 12, 2020, the World Health Organization advised governments that before reopening, rates of positivity in testing, that's out of all tests conducted, how many came back positive for COVID-19, should remain at 5% or lower for at least 14 days. So we're going to take a look back in time to see how the states were doing in June as compared to today. We'll compare June 18, 2020 to now, and the bar graphs will list the states on the bottom and the percent positive tests on the side. So here you have a graph. I hope you can see my mouse. There's the 5%, okay? On the bottom are all the states. Look how many states are under 5%, the majority of them. In fact, 34 states had less than 5% positivity, and only 17 states had higher. I say 17 because Puerto Rico, it's not a state, and also for some strange reason, Puerto Rico always tests at 100%, which I find a little hard to believe. So we'll look next door to it, and we see South Carolina at that time was 22%. We're going to contrast that with now. This is from this weekend. And what you can notice is that there are only 6 states that have under 5% sensitivity. And Connecticut is right on the borderline. And the other thing I want you to notice is that instead of hugging that 5%, take a look at this graph. You see how the states that were higher, they're not much higher except for these 4. You see that? Now take a look at the new graph. As soon as you get past 5%, it's a roller coaster ride, up and up and up until you get to 40% here. It's 40%. And then Washington, for reasons that I cannot explain, has over 100% positivity. So we're not going to look at Washington because I can't explain that number. There's where California is this weekend, about 7% now. And there's South Dakota. And we're going to spend a little time with South Dakota because I want to make a point to you about social distancing. So be prepared when we go to South Dakota. It's going to be important for you to understand why they're doing so poorly right now. Now we're going to look at the exact same data, but now as a map, okay? We're going to see these numbers spread out so you can see what it looked like. So here we are on June 18, 2020. Take a look at that map, almost completely green, a little bit of yellow, 1 orange or 2 oranges, and 1 dark orange. Okay, no reds at all. And Hawaii and Alaska, both safe to go to in those days. Now take a look at this weekend. Completely different, right? Look at all the red, couple of yellows, a few yellows, and just a sprinkling of green. Washington, D.C., Connecticut, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, definitely not Maine, and Hawaii, and that's it. So I guess if you want to go to Hawaii right now, it would be a good time, but I think you're going to have to quarantine yourself for 14 days before they will let you out of your hotel room. Not much of a vacation, huh? And now for the most shocking graph of all, is it? Oh yeah, it is. Okay, folks, a little bit different here. So here is March, May, July, September, November, okay? Here are the confirmed new cases, not cumulative, new cases. And here are all the different countries they compared, and what sticks out? Right here, the United States of America. Take a good look at that graph. It just shoots up, eclipses, I believe, India, or maybe, no, India, and then just goes straight up like a rocket ship. Look at that. That's frightening, to me at least. It's followed by India and then Brazil. So here's your future right here, folks. This little graph right here, going straight up like a rocket ship in our country right now. You're living in it. Let's take a close look at the percent positives over time. We're going to take a closer look at the United States as a whole and then find that we as a nation are headed for trouble. We'll then take a look at California, which has a more laid back graph, and I'll show you that. We'll look at the Big Apple and find out that they had a New York moment. And finally, we'll take a close look at South Dakota, the Mount Rushmore state, and find they may be a little too friendly for their own good. In each graph, when you look to the future, you will see there's a whole lot of trouble coming on. So here's the US as a whole, and I'm going to divide these into 3 waves, and I use that loosely. It kind of doesn't mean what maybe you might think. It doesn't mean we're having a new wave of virus, but we're having a new wave of positivity. So I want to make sure I clarify that. Right now, we're about 10% for the United States. And here's 1, 2, and 3. You're going to see those numbers on each of these so you can compare. And you can see here how it goes up and then even higher. And I believe this graph has gone even higher since I got this weekend. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to update them. It's a little bit time consuming to do that. Now, what about California? Well, I promised you a more laid back graph, and here it is. So here's 1, 2, and now 3. And you can see it's going up there, and it's continued to rise. It's about 7% now. Just so you know, the highest percentage of positive cases, or positive testing, I should say, in California was 8%. And then I believe it went down to 2, but no lower. Now, what about the Big Apple? Okay, New York had its moment. Do you remember it? Here they are in May, and it skyrocketed. 1 point, almost 50% of people were positive. And then almost magically, it went down, way down to less than 1% for the longest time. There's really no hump here. Do you see that? That makes it different than all the other states that you might look at, except for a handful that had this type of pattern. But now look at it. You see that going up, up, up? Although it may not seem like much to you, there's a doubling time here. And when you have exponential growth, it means that New York is in trouble. It means that we are going to see this go higher and higher and higher. And I don't know where that's going to end, but I'm following it closely. So I promised you we'd look at South Dakota, and I also told you there was a good reason to do that. So why is South Dakota leading the nation in positivity? And here's a graph that will explain it to you, but I have to take you through it. So what these cell companies can do, the cell phone companies, is they can tell how close individuals are and whether they or not they are socially distancing. They do that by tracking where the cell phones are in relation to each other. And we have this data for every single state in the union. Here's South Dakota. Now on the left side of the graph, when we started off, they have 0%, which is typical mobility. And this is when we started to find out about the virus, right? We started to find out, they had a little bit of partying and then shut down. So now the graph is low, it goes a little higher, it goes a little higher, and then they opened up the door, and look what happened. Instead of people going back to normal, you have 10%, 15% less social distancing than they did before they were ever told anything. In other words, it was time to party in South Dakota. And the result of all that partying is, well, the next graph. There it is. And here is South Dakota. So little bump here, smaller bump here, and then ever since, I don't know, before October, I guess, it just took off like a rocket ship, all the way to 60%. And I'm not sure if this is done growing. We'll have to see, but you can see the effects of not social distancing. It is tremendous. And so even though South Dakota is relatively away from everybody, once the virus hit, it hit them hard. Later on in this talk, I'm going to explain to you why we've had this second bout and why I anticipate it is going to be even more, well, it already is, than this second wave, okay? So you're gonna have to wait a little bit for that, but it is coming. So 2020, you usually think about glasses, right? 2020 vision. It's a year out of focus. Maybe it's good that it's ending, but I have a feeling 2021, at least the beginning of it, not going to be much better. A little bit about the chronology. I'm not going to spend as much time now as I did the first time, but New Year's Eve, when you were all celebrating, that's when the first reported cases were in Wuhan, China. 2 and 3 weeks later, there were the first deaths in China, and it spread rapidly through Asia. By the 3rd week, they had a first case in the United States. It then spread to France, Egypt, and on cruise ships, and that was in the news, and you probably do remember it. And by the end of February, on leap year, we had our first US death in Washington. Etiology, it is a family, coronaviruses are a family of RNA viruses. Coronaviruses cause the common cold, which we're all familiar with. You'll also remember that you can't really shake the common cold. It keeps coming back no matter what you do. These tend to cause mild upper respiratory diseases in humans, common cold. Those are coronaviruses type A, and then there are the coronaviruses type B. And of the 7 known species of coronavirus, only 3 are known to cause severe infections in humans. And they all have something special in common. Can you guess what that might be? Well, if you guessed animals, you'd be right. That is correct, animals. And here they are. In 2003, we had the original severe acute respiratory disease, also known as SARS. We got that from southern China, from civet cats, and there's a civet cat. And in 2012, we had the Middle East respiratory syndrome from dromedary camels, nice looking animals. And then in 2019, we got SARS-CoV-2 from horseshoe bats. They get their name because of this peculiar, I guess, horseshoe shape under their nose. They look like kind of friendly creatures. And this is a pangolin. They originally thought that pangolins were also at fault. I think that's fallen out of favor, but I kept the picture in because I've grown fond of pangolins. Transmission. So these are zoonotic or transmitted to humans through animals. It's hypothesized that horseshoe bats are a natural reservoir. The virus is transmitted mainly via inhalation of aerosol droplets from coughing, sneezing, or talking to symptomatic individuals, as we see also through asymptomatic individuals, unfortunately. And there's also direct transmission through hand-to-face contact from infected surfaces, although this has been felt to be less important with time. Let's go under the microscope, folks, okay? We're going to discuss what the virus looks like, what are its components, and how does it get into your cells. Let me tell you, this is not trivial. You're going to want to pay attention to this part of the talk because the terms that I use, you're going to hear in passing to describe the various medications and vaccines that are offered. So pay attention. This is very important stuff. Here is an artist's depiction of the virus, and I'm only going to focus you on 2, well, maybe 3 parts of it. The most important thing for you to look at is right here. This is called the spike protein or the spike glycoprotein. It sticks out of the virus. Do you see that? And you know why it's important? It's because this spike glycoprotein is the key that allows the virus to get into your cells. That is it. And it is the focus of major pharmaceuticals. Now, we said it's an RNA virus. You might as well know where that RNA virus is. And here it is. Encapsulated in this protein capsule is RNA, that is nuclear material. And since we're going to talk about RNA, and some of you may not be familiar with it, RNA is like an order sheet with a recipe for the cell. It orders the cell to make proteins, and it tells the cell exactly how it wants to. You can think of that as a blueprint, you can think of that as a computer program, or you can think about it as an order and recipe for a short order cook. And why a short order cook? It's because unlike DNA, which lasts a very long time, the RNA is not meant to last forever in the cell. It's rapidly destroyed, and so it's short-lived. And that's important for you to know as well. So I have a little artist depiction of what this looks like in 3D, so you can kind of get your mind around this because you may not be used to seeing in 3D, and there it is. Those are the spike proteins lighting up, and they act as keys. Here's an artist's depiction of what it looks like. And this is what happens when you go to your Thanksgiving dinner with your aunts and uncles and your grandparents and your kids from college are home, and they're all having fun and singing on the guitar. And you take a deep breath, and into your airway comes the viruses. And there are these little tiny viruses. They're traveling down, and they're looking for certain cells. They're looking for cells that have receptors. They're called ACE2 receptors. And they bind to the ACE2 receptor, and the cell lets them in. Once it's in, it can release its nuclear material and start to make more viruses. I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you two apparatuses that the cell uses. Don't worry too much about that. Well, it'd be nice if I went to the next slide. That's a ribosome. Okay, that's the manager of production. And then we're going to see the Golgi apparatus, and that's the factory. And here's the birth of a new virus. Happy birthday. This happens millions and billions and probably trillions of times. And this virus goes to other cells in your body to repeat the process, and then goes from you or someone you know out into the world to infect someone else. Look again on the surface of the cell, these little tiny receptors. Okay, you see them? That's how the virus gets in. It's very important that you remember that, okay? So the number of secondary infections is called the R naught, generated from one infected individual, was originally estimated to be 2 to 2.5. We're going to see why that number is probably closer to 6 or 10. And in any event, it's higher than influenza. So one person getting influenza on average will infect 0.9 to 2.1 people. Asymptomatic individuals are also infectious. That's incredibly important. So you can have someone in your midst that looks totally healthy and yet has millions and millions of viruses in their throat. And just by talking to them, you can get sick. And if you spend enough time with them, you can end up in the hospital, or worse. They produce high viral loads. That means lots and lots of viruses, okay, not a little. And there is efficient and prolonged shedding of these virions from the upper respiratory tract. And get a load of this number, folks, for up to 20 days. Now, I think that's been revised. This slide's a little bit old, but remember, quite a long time. Certainly enough for someone to spread it to many, many other people. You couldn't explain why we have so many people sick otherwise, right? It wouldn't make any sense. So it can also remain infectious on surfaces for a few hours up to a few days. Again, not as important now as before. So let me just show you on the bottom here, someone sneezing, and you can see these respiratory droplets traveling. The large droplets will, because they're large and heavier, will drop to the ground within 2 or 3 feet. The smaller droplets will go up to 6 feet, and we'll show you further. We're going to show you a lot more. And then let me just go through these times so you know. So most of you may have gotten packages because you're not going out shopping. 24 hours. Can live in the air for 3 hours. You go to the grocery store, they hand you coins, 4 hours. And if you're handling plastic or stainless steel, watch this number, folks, 2 to 3 days. So when would you possibly come across something that's made out of stainless steel? Well, you might not even be thinking about it, but when you go to pick up the gas, think about what you're picking up. That's made of steel, isn't it? And think about how many people with their ungloved hands touch that. And I don't remember anyone ever going out of a gas station to clean it up ahead of time like they do in restaurants. And so if you're going to go to a gas station, I recommend you wear gloves. I certainly do. And you'll be safer. And no one's really studied this phenomenon, but I think gas stations may be a vector. Everybody uses them. So why did it spread so fast originally? Well, you know, our immune system protects us against infectious diseases. However, when a new, unique pathogen comes into the world, and nothing could be more unique than getting a virus from a horseshoe bat, then no one has any immunity and everybody gets infected. So what is this about flattening the curve? Well, one of the questions, I asked for questions ahead of time, was this: how to flatten the curve, and is that really possible? And because I got this question, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it, okay? And I'm going to show you exactly how this happens and what it means, and a little more in depth so that you understand the consequences of flattening the curve and what you end up with when you've done that, and then you let people out. So flattening the curve was a goal originally introduced early in the pandemic. It consisted of locking down the population in order to curtail the spread of contagion. The original rationale was to prevent the hospitals from being overloaded with patients. Now, hospital overload actually occurred in Italy, northern Italy, with disastrous consequences. People who were afflicted could not get treatment in Italy. Bergamo, a northern Italian province, was hit the hardest. And here's a quote from Bergamo, quote, "Hospitals became makeshift morgues and produced parades of coffins and scenes of devastation that became a warning to officials in other Western countries of how the virus could rapidly overwhelm health systems and turn infirmaries into incubators." Did you hear that right? Turn infirmaries into incubators. So the basic concept looks like this. We're going to skip. And we're going to go to this graph. I'm going to spend a little time on this, okay? So let me take this apart for you and then put it back together. Initially, you have 199 healthy people. The healthy people are all these dots. See all these dots? Those are healthy people. Then you've got the one person who's sick. There's the red dot in the middle. And nobody's recovered, okay, at this point, because nobody's gotten sick, right? That makes sense. So the one thing they also want you to watch is the change over time. This is going to be a bell-shaped curve that is built up in real time according to what's going on down here, okay? And so now, without further ado, keep your eye on the numbers and keep your eye on the graph. And here we go. So you see, nobody's social distancing. They're just minding their own business and people are getting sick. And you see how this is going up and up and up. And more people are getting sick. Then finally, at some point, you see that people are recovering, and that's the purple. And take a look at that curve. That is about as bell-shaped as I can imagine. So there you go without social distancing. So then what happens when you do social distancing? Let's take a look at that. Here's with social distancing. Now remember, 199 people are healthy. Those are all these nice people here. One person is sick, and so far no one's recovered because no one's gotten sick. These little dots are going to socially distance for you, okay? And let's see what that looks like. Now take a look. Look at that curve. Compare it to the other curve. Remember the bell-shaped curve? Look how flat it is. I'm going to play this out and tell you what the problem is with this scenario. So we're socially distancing, people still getting sick, but not quite as quickly. And we're keeping it down to around 30 at a time, which is kind of nice, actually. It's kind of nice. I want you to look at where we are at now that we've kept people away. We still have 128 people who are healthy. And in this case, healthy means they have no immunity to the virus, and therefore they can still get sick. You have not solved the problem. You have sick people, but not that many, which is kind of nice. So hospitals, doctors' offices, they're not going to be overwhelmed. And you have people recovering. The people recovering have immunity, right? But it's only about 48 out of 200, about 20%. That might be the amount of immunity in New York after their devastating experience in May. So let's see what happens if you completely quarantine and then let people out. It's not a pretty sight. So here's the infected person, and if you're unfortunate to be quarantined with them, well, not a good time, but then they let the gates open. You can't keep people quarantined forever. And watch that curve just go up, just like the original curve. You see that by quarantining long-term, you haven't really accomplished that much. You've accomplished a little bit, but everybody's getting sick. So that's an important concept to understand, that even though we've gone through all this and it's been very, very difficult, majority of people out there, certainly in New York, at least 80%, and in California, probably 90% of people can still get this devastating illness. I'm just going to put this in here because it goes along. What will happen when people are vaccinated? And so this is actual data. This is not made up data. These are actual places. And the vaccine is the measles vaccine. So we go from 10% all the way up to 99.7%. And we're going to see that the more people who are vaccinated, the more people who are immune, the less likely it is that people can get infected. But you're going to see that it's a random kind of thing. In other words, just because everybody's vaccinated doesn't mean that you're completely protected. And I'm going to run this now. And there you go, it's spreading. More people vaccinated as you go up. You can see not protected, not protected, not protected. Get a load of Island County, Washington, down here. Only 75% vaccinated, but they didn't get another case after that. And then right here, 90%, they did very well. But look at Gaston County, Florida, where 99.7% of the people didn't get vaccinated. Look what happened, okay? It didn't really work out. So it's random, you know, the more people vaccinated, the less likely, but it's not a guarantee. There are no guarantees here. The virus doesn't know people are vaccinated. It just doesn't know, doesn't care. So there is the Statue of Liberty wearing a mask and looking a little apprehensive. Clinical presentation. Incubation period is from 2 to 14 days with an average of 5 days. And 80% of infections are mild or asymptomatic. That is the curse of COVID, okay? The fact that you cannot readily identify people who are infected. 15% are severe infections requiring oxygen therapy. And 5% are critical infections requiring ventilation. And the proportion of severe and critical to mild cases is higher than in influenza infections. So I will let you know that with influenza, which is something that we see yearly, we have patients in the hospital all the time. And they tend to be people who already have other problems. And thankfully, we have treatment and they do relatively well. Asymptomatic cases can transmit the virus, a big problem, represent more than 50% of all infections, may not develop any noticeable symptoms. And here's a key you can tell your friends. A lot of these people lose their sense of taste and smell, okay? So if you have someone that can't taste anything or they're having problems smelling, time to get a test. And maybe self-quarantine. All right, just a little bit more about clinical. It's hard to talk about a viral infection without telling people its manifestations. Fever, dry cough, and flu-like symptoms. If you get sicker, it's going to affect the lungs, breathing, and if you get complications, it can affect every organ in the body. Now here's a chart that's very useful. If people want this chart because they want to know whether they have the common cold or influenza or COVID-19, I'll be happy to make that chart available to you. Couple of highlights with COVID-19, fever and dry cough are very common. Sniffles and sore throat, not as common. With influenza, headache is very common. And with the common cold, you just pretty much get sneezing, nasal congestion, and a sore throat. So this is a chart that is a little bit helpful. Who's at risk for complications? Well, immunosuppressed people, people over 65, people with chronic diseases, and pregnancy. We're going to be shifting our focus to testing. Lots of people had questions about testing. And so I'm not sure what the significance is of this cartoon, but I'll leave it to your imagination. I guess you're better off not going through the drive-through. I don't know. So testing is an important tool in the fight against COVID-19. And here we're going to get into the phases of the illness. It's very, very important, okay? Why is it important? Because different treatments correspond to different times in the illness. So initially you have incubation. What is incubation? You've been exposed to the virus, it's growing. You and the world are not aware of it. Why are you not aware of it? You have no symptoms. You're fine. You're going about your daily business, okay? And so in the bottom, you see the incubation phase. They give it 1 week. The virus enters and then symptoms begin after about a week. Infection is the next phase. And once you develop symptoms, you are in the infection stage. And there you are, a little bit before 1 week and then going on to 2 weeks and sometimes much, much longer. Then your body mounts an immune response, okay? That's after 2 weeks, okay? And we'll talk about that more. So here are the tests. So the first test takes tests for viral RNA. Remember that stuff that was in the virus? That's called RNA. This is a microscopic test. And as the virus multiplies in the body, the viral RNA becomes detectable, okay? And it can be detected before symptoms begin. Do you see that? And here's a graph. Doesn't apply to everybody. It's just so you can kind of get a feel for it. And in this particular graph, it starts before a week, maybe, I don't know, 5 days, and goes on to 3 weeks, but it can vary, depends on the case. Then you have viral antigen, okay? Now, a couple of things about antigen, those are proteins. Notice that there's a little bit of a lag before you can detect them, okay? And then after you're well, there's a period of time where you can only detect the RNA. So we would say that the test for the viral RNA is more sensitive than the antigen because you detect the disease before and after, during which times the antigen test doesn't tell you anything, okay? Antibodies, you're gonna hear antibody tests. Totally different, folks. Antibodies are produced by the body. Which body? Your body. They're not produced by the virus. They are your response to the viral infection. The antibodies develop after weeks and are a result of your response to the infection, okay? So there are 3 types of COVID tests, and I've already hinted at it. There's the viral RNA, which detects the RNA of the COVID-19 virus. There's the antigen test, which detects antigens of the COVID-19 virus. And there's the antibody test, which detects antibodies created by your body. And here is everything together. Well, no, this is the viral RNA test, also called PCR, and that stands for polymerase chain reaction. And a nasal swab is placed in the back of your throat, or a saliva sample is obtained. The sample is sent to a lab where microscopic amounts of virus are detected, and the testing can take hours or up to 5 days to get results. In fact, disappointingly, and in Riverside, I've seen people have to wait up to 5 days to get results. Well, how does that help you if you're sick? Not very much. I've seen it now, I think most recently it's 2 or 3 days, which is better. The antigen test, samples are obtained in the same manner as the PCR test. It's much less sensitive, but here's the key about antigen tests, and you need to remember this. It's very important. It's felt to identify individuals most likely to be infectious. Now, why is that? Well, it's estimated that you need 5 million viruses to have a positive antigen test. And the thinking of virologists is that at that point, you're likely to be infectious, okay? Whereas with the PCR, you can detect it so early that not only don't you have symptoms, but you're not infectious, okay? You may not even know that you have the virus. Maybe you went for a test because you wanted to go traveling, or you had to get a pulmonary function test in my office, or any number of reasons, and then surprise. Or more importantly, maybe you were exposed to someone who you know was sick, and now you want to find out if you are sick. Well, then you'd want the more sensitive PCR test, right? Because you want to catch it as early as possible. And here's the antibody test. It's a blood test measuring your response to the virus. It does not determine whether you have an active infection. It could be used to screen for persons less susceptible to infection, since if you have antibodies, theoretically, you're not going to get as sick, and a person with antibodies can still spread disease. Now, why is that? Well, if you're infected and your body's beginning to fight the infection, you're still sick. So you can still spread that virus, okay? Your body's still fighting it. So positive tests tell you 2 important but very different things. The first 2, do I have it? Viral RNA and antigen tests are positive, says you are infected right now. The second one says, did I have it? If the antibody is positive, you were infected in the past. I'm going to give you just a few seconds to absorb that, and I'm going to move on. So where's the contagious period? Well, there it is for a week to 2.5 weeks, okay? Although more recently, the CDC has said that once your symptoms manifest, you have to isolate yourself for 10 days. And I believe they've made that recommendation. It used to be 14 days. So you can be contagious even if you don't have symptoms. And here's what some of these tests look like. This, I believe, is an antibody test. You prick your skin. People with diabetes do this all the time. You, I guess, put it in this little thingy, and you put it in this flask, kind of like a pregnancy test, I guess. And you put the reagent in here, and then up here, you see whether it was positive or negative. And get a load of this. In only 10 minutes, you can find out whether you have antibodies or not. It's a very easy test to do. Here is an example of a rapid antigen test. Only detects large quantities of viruses, but it's much faster than the PCR and more readily available. And again, identifies individuals most likely to spread the virus. So a very useful tool. Let's say you have kids going to school. You want something that's fast, easy, and tells you who's contagious. And not only that, because it's so readily available, you could even test twice a day. In doing so, you could basically create a situation where it's safe for kids to go to school. And that would be nice because most of our kids right now are being homeschooled. Here's an at-home saliva collection kit from Spectrum. They're expensive, $100 to $150 per test, so I don't recommend that many of you go out and buy one because, well, you know, you may spend $100 on a test, but 2 days later, that test isn't helpful. If you get exposed to someone else, you'll need another test. It doesn't tell you what's going to happen in the future. So here's a slide that just summarizes what I just said. I'm going to say it again. I think it's important enough. PCR testing is most accurate. There's a longer processing time. This is what we use in the hospital before you come in the hospital to do a PCR test. Antigen testing, rapid and expensive, but there are some accuracy problems. And antibody testing, remember, you make the antibodies, not the virus. Rapid and detects disease spread, then there are false positives and negative, although they're improving these tests all the time. And here's a worker all gowned up, taking a nasal swab into this. Looks like he doesn't know what's coming, okay? It looks pretty calm to me. But those things are not that pleasant to get, and they have to go all the way in your nose to the very back of your throat. Okay, fine. So let's move on. A little break now. We've gone through enough. It says the whole world's going crazy. At least we still have sports. And then, of course, all the sports get canceled. Prevention. So if there's any contribution that I can make to your health, I think prevention is it. And if I can't accomplish giving you a little bit more information than you can get from the TV or the newspapers, then I have not done my job. We're going to spend a lot of time on prevention, and hopefully you're going to hear things here, or maybe emphasize things here that are not emphasized enough. And honestly, I believe that this will help you stay safe. And if you talk to your loved ones, help them stay safe too. So be prepared. We've got lots of slides and lots of information for you here. So home isolation or avoiding crowds whenever it's possible to minimize the chance for exposure. I think most of you are doing it. The second recommendation says covering coughs and sneezes with a tissue or the inner elbow. In my opinion, if you're coughing and sneezing, you have no business being out in public, okay? And yeah, sneezing with a tissue or inner elbow is not going to accomplish as much as you might hope. Washing hands regularly for at least 20 seconds a day with hand sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol. So I wash my hands. I'm constantly in contact with patients infected with COVID, and I must wash my hands 20 times a day with alcohol. And at the end of the day, I know that because, well, even Jergens lotion can't help me. Maintain 6 feet distancing from other people. That's so-called social distancing, or some people call it anti-social distancing. I call it healthy distancing. And we're going to talk about why 6 feet may not be enough. Regular cleaning of all high-touch surfaces within the home, but also outside, in the office, at your church or synagogue, in your school, in the grocery store, whatever. They don't seem to do it at the gas station, and that's one place where I think they really need to. And it says wearing a face mask is strongly recommended. I would say right now it's de rigueur. That means you have to, right? We're going to move on to masks. Everybody asked me about masks. Well, doctor, you know, what do you think about masks, okay? And I'll tell you, it's controversial. There's studies, I think in Denmark, that show that masks don't work, but we're not going to look at those studies because I don't really believe them. I'm going to show you a study I do believe. And you know, I always listen to hamsters. And so the question of the night is, what can a bunch of hamsters teach us about COVID? Well, the hints in the picture, of course, take a look at that picture. Even the hamsters are wearing masks, right? Why are they wearing masks? Well, I'm going to tell you about the hamster study. And here it is. They took two groups of hamsters and put them in cages. One group was infected with SARS-CoV-2. Yes, hamsters can get COVID-2. You didn't know that, did you? The other group is healthy. And then they took turns putting masks on the cages, okay? So when only the healthy group wore masks, the transmission went down by 16%. That's about a 6, folks. When only the infected group wore masks, the transmission went down by 33%. That's 1/3 less. That's great. But get a load of this. And this you can tell your friends. Ask them if they heard about the hamster study, right? When both groups wore masks, there was an 80% decrease in transmission. Now, a couple of things that I want to point out to you about that 80%. It's not 100%. Did you notice that? It's not 100%, and this is in a controlled environment, which means that 20% of those poor hamsters still got sick. When you're going outside and you're wearing your mask and you're feeling really comfortable, I want you to remember that 20% of the hamsters got sick. Don't be one of those hamsters, okay? I'm going to tell you how you can avoid becoming a sick hamster. But the next point is equally as important, and it's something that I cannot stress enough. And the reason for that is you don't hear it in the news. They don't talk about it on the podium. You don't even hear it from the politicians, and yet it's going to make all the sense in the world to you. If you can understand this, you can understand how if you can't avoid getting sick, you can avoid getting very sick. And let me tell you something, the most important thing you can do is to avoid getting very sick. I'm going to share with you that just before this talk, I got a call from a patient who I've been following every day for a week because she tested positive for COVID. And that patient called me today because she has to go to the hospital right now. So heed my words. This information can help you and your loved ones, and it can definitely help save your life, or at least a trip to the hospital. And here it is. Most importantly, that the hamsters that were infected have milder illnesses. Now, why would that be? The word is inoculum. Inoculum is the word. And what does inoculum mean? Inoculum means how much virus entered your system when you got exposed. Inoculum, and here's the paper from, where's it from? International Society for Infectious Diseases. Okay, that's the actual paper. And it basically says inoculum determines the severity of the illness. Very important. Masks and social distancing both serve to decrease the inoculum if exposed. Masks and social distancing, not one or the other, okay? Good air circulation, being outdoors, wind, all serve to disperse the droplet cloud and minimize exposure. Put this into your brain and never forget it, because you're not going to hear it anywhere else. It's disappointing, but it's very, very important. Inoculum, the amount of virus you're exposed to. So here are your high-risk situations. Pharmacist, early on, a 25-year-old pharmacist died in San Diego, and one of a similar age in Riverside, I believe. Nurses, you would not believe how many nurses have gotten sick. I recently spoke to a nurse who works on one of the wards. He wasn't even aware he was sick. He was out of work for a month. Crowds, I don't know, crowds in the news, folks, you hear about them? Well, guess what? That's when the virus spreads, okay? Whether they want to talk about it or not, crowds are not good things to have right now. And unfortunately, things like church choirs where people are singing, shouting, talking loudly, not good things to do. The more people you're around, the more likely it is that you're with someone that's infected. It's going to vary from place to place. If you're a place like South Dakota with 42% sensitivity, just a few people, you're going to get exposed. If you were in New York when it was less than 1%, you could have quite a few people and not get exposed. So there's that. And so here's Batman and Robin saying this is a job for real heroes. Well, you know, honestly, it's also a job for you and your family. Go out after this talk and tell everybody what you learned here, like your life depended on it. Everybody that you love, and even people that you're not that fond of, spread the word. We're going to talk about social distancing, and this is an actual magazine cover from when typhoid was the thing. And the article was all about how people were not socially distancing, and here they all are congregating and also getting sick. You may have heard about Typhoid Mary, okay? And they write on the bottom, how many Typhoid Marys are in this crowd? Thousands of perfectly well people are unknowing carriers and spreaders of this disease. And so social distancing, origin of the 6 feet rule. Why do they talk about 6 feet? Where did that come from? Well, there's a history to that, and you're going to learn about that tonight. As soon as they developed photography, scientists studied the distance droplets traveled starting in the 19th century. And by 1940s, they took close-up imaging of sneezing, talking, or coughing. This is from the 1942 Jennison experiment. It's an actual photo used in the experiment to show how far a sneeze would go. And take a look at that. It's pretty frightening. Imagine if that was COVID-19 and you were anywhere near that person. So I wanted to bring this down to home because, you know, people, they hear droplet clouds and they say, we know you lost me. I don't see any droplet clouds. So I want to make sure you see these photos. You know, if you've ever been in a cold environment, I mean, not like California cold, I mean, really cold, seriously cold. You ever been up north? You ever gone skiing? You ever visited your friends in New York and wondered why they live there? Nothing against New York. I grew up there. But if it's really, 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 really cold outside and you breathe, you can see your breath. You can see it really well. And here's pictures of it. So here's a man just breathing normally, and look at that cloud. You can kind of imagine it would be like a cloud in the sky, okay? Because every single time he breathes, he's making another cloud. Here's a woman who may be breathing a little bit more than usual, but look how far, she doesn't look like she's trying that hard, that cloud goes, okay? Here's a young girl, okay? And I want you to notice something, not just the snow, that's kind of nice. She's making a cloud too, but look how small it is compared to, I don't know, like a walrus. Yeah, my advice, if they ever come up with a walrus virus that's affecting humans, you want to really stay very far away from those animals, really far away. But take another look at this cloud there with the little girl and contrast it to these older people, okay? There's a reason why I'm showing it to you. This it's going to explain something that maybe you didn't understand until now, okay? Have a couple more pictures, okay? Former president giving a speech in cold weather. Take a look at how far away from him these droplet clouds are forming. And you can see as the wind blows, they move, and they disperse a little here, but look here, they're still very, very concentrated, okay? Here's a man warming his fingers, and look how far that goes. And even this little birdie tweeting has these little droplet clouds, okay? And look how far away they go. Now, the next slide is going to shock you. I want you to remember this next slide. I didn't put it in by accident. It was very hard to find. I think there may be only one on the internet. Maybe there are two. If you find more, let me know. I'd like to collect them. It is a man with a mask, and not just any kind of mask. That's a pretty darn good mask, don't you think? Look at that thing. Covers everything. Got the earmuffs and everything else. But there's something else to notice in this photo. Take a close look. Do you see it? Look at that huge droplet cloud. Look at it. It's huge. He's not skiing. He's just breathing. And yet around him is this huge droplet cloud. So now I want you to, when you go to the grocery store or the Costco or the Sam's Club or where there's a large number of people, I want you to think about these photos. These photos will tell you how far away you need to stay from other people not to get sick. If you can imagine that this is going on around you, unfortunately invisible, you'll have a better idea of how to keep yourself safe. So yes to masks, I believe in masks, but yes also to social distancing. And not just social distancing, but as if your life depended on it. In other words, vigilance. Vigilance from the time you walk in to the time you walk out. And also studying whether or not a situation is high risk or low risk. We're going to cover that very shortly. So the next question is, the 6 feet enough? And the answer is not always. And there's 6 feet. Okay. In 8 of the 10 studies, remember we talked about that study, showed horizontal projection of respiratory droplets beyond 6 feet. That's 8 out of 10, folks. So why did they end up with 6 feet? Got me. And in one study, and this is from that study, 26 feet, okay, or 8 meters. Look at that, okay? 26 feet. All right. So this is a Finnish study that used a supercomputer to basically simulate what would happen if a person coughed in a grocery store. Now, grocery store, it's an enclosed environment. There's no wind. There are no fans in this grocery store, so poor ventilation. And the point that they were trying to make is this cough, it is a cough, not a sneeze, spread not just in the aisle, but went over the aisle to this poor guy or girl or child who's standing there feeling perfectly safe. Look at that. And it's worth looking up on the internet. It's taken from a video, and the video shows you this simulation, and it's worth watching, I think. So here is a chart that I want to spend a little bit of time with you on. It's very, very important, okay? We have the following variables: high occupancy, low occupancy, poorly ventilated, indoors and well ventilated, like with a fan or UV filters. I know a dentist who's very, very fond of UV filters, and outdoors and well ventilated. Now the green is relatively safe and the red is not safe at all. But we're not done. There's more variables. These are the variables you have to consider: face coverings or no face coverings, contact for a short time, contact for a prolonged time, and also whether it's silent, speaking, or shouting and singing. Okay? And this graph, if you want it, I'll be happy to make it available to you, but I need to move on. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on aerosol spread. In July of this year, 239 scientists from 32 different countries and many different areas of science, including virology, aerosol physics, and epidemiology, penned an open letter urging the World Health Organization to change their advice. World Health Organization stated that aerosols spread was not possible. And quote from their letter, "We ignore COVID-19 airborne spread indoors at our peril." And I ascribe to this in certain situations. So in their letter, it said, as evidence, that taller individuals are more likely to get the virus, and outbreaks usually occur in karaoke parties, cheering at clubs, conversations in bars, exercising in gyms. And they came up with this little slogan, a civic duty. And what does that stand for? Avoid. Avoid what? Crowding, indoors, poor ventilation, close proximity, long duration, unmasked, and talking, singing, and yelling. And I recommend that you do all those things. And so this may be a cartoon from the future where the kids are asking Grandpa what it was like before the COVID-19. Hopefully we won't get to that point. And this is the study that showed that live virus could be detected in hospital rooms of infected patients. But for better or worse, I'm in those hospital rooms every single day, many, many times a day. I'm going to go through this very quickly because time is of the essence, but this was an experience in Maine where they were able to give 1,000 children a camp experience without getting them sick. I'm going to have to move a little quickly here, but that's worth reading about. And then a hot topic, COVID-19 transmission in children. The child is not to blame. That's an editorial from Pediatrics, August of 2020, so it's current. And just to make it very quick, many studies have shown that children usually get this from adults and they rarely spread it to adults. And I'll just quote Dr. Fauci from November 29th, 2020, because he just had a change in position. And he stated that if you look at the data, the spread among children and from children is not very big at all, not like what one would have suspected. So let's try to get the kids back, Fauci said. He's referring to influenza because in the case of influenza, childhood spread is the rule, okay? All right, I'm gonna go through this even quicker, folks. This is the treatment. If anyone's interested in hearing more about this, I'm more than happy to do it, but I'm gonna move on, folks, because we're running a little late on time. This is a protocol called the Math Plus protocol. They use methylprednisolone. That is a shining beacon for treatment now. It's saving many lives. Heparin, because the disease, when it's advanced, causes clotting throughout the body. And I moved through there quickly for a reason. So we're going to go to convalescent plasma. I had a question about that. First of all, what is it? They take blood from someone who has had the disease. If you have the disease, you have antibodies floating around. And just like a blood transfusion, they put that into another patient. The only thing is they take out the cellular material and the cells are mixed in plasma and they only transfuse the plasma. The problems are you have all the problems that you have with blood transfusions, volume overload, incompatibility, any of it. We're moving on. I'm going to move even faster, folks, and I'm sorry. So this is a very complicated slide. I made it easier. A little bit of review. First stage is incubation, where you have bioreplication. And the question I pose is, how would you identify an asymptomatic patient? How would you know? Asymptomatic patient would be identified if, say, you went to a relative's house for Thanksgiving and everybody there got sick. That's an asymptomatic person that would want to get tested. It would be, and that basically says the same thing. Or a tracer identifies someone who's been in contact and then contacts that person to get them tested. So there is tracing going on in California. Then symptomatic, where your immune system kicks off. It's the immune system that gives you symptoms, mainly. And we're just going to go through this a little quickly. And then there's the early pulmonary phase and the late pulmonary phase. And if anybody's interested, I'll be happy to go back to it, but I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker now. It's always darkest before the dawn. Okay, so what is the dawn, folks? Because it's going to be dark. It's going to be real dark. So Regeneron, you probably first heard about it when our president became sick. Regeneron is a cocktail of monoclonal antibodies that binds to the spike protein. It's most effective in an outpatient setting, but it has to be given over a period of 3 hours. That's a little bit problematic. So you have to have people who are asymptomatic coming usually to a hospital setting and getting transfused for 3 hours. But it rapidly reduces the viral load in the first week of infection and has the greatest improvement in patients with initial high viral load. All right, folks, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, okay? Everybody wants to know about these vaccines, and I'm here to tell you about them. What is a vaccine? Vaccines are used to induce immunity. They usually contain a weakened or inactive pathogen or part of a pathogen the body can recognize. The desired end result is that the person develops antibodies and cell-mediated immunity to the pathogen. The original first vaccine was against smallpox. And if you think you have it bad now, let me tell you, maybe not so much. Smallpox was a deadly disease with a 30% mortality. That's right, you get smallpox, you have a 1 in 3 chance of dying. And survivors are usually scarred for life, and you see the picture, you can understand that. In the 18th century, Russian and English physicians developed the first vaccines against smallpox. In 1967, the World Health Organization started a campaign to vaccinate the world against smallpox, and then 12 years later, they announced that smallpox had been eradicated. So vaccines are wonderful and amazing things, but they can also have unintended consequences. Since the process involves growing viruses in cell culture, you can introduce contamination from other infectious elements or allergic reactions. So for instance, if you get a flu shot, they're always going to ask if you're allergic to eggs. And just to give you an idea of disastrous consequences, in 1961, the Sabin and Salk vaccines, those are the polio vaccines, were contaminated with the SV40 virus, which has the potential to cause cancer. We're going to discuss mRNA vaccines. mRNA, the M stands for messenger. I'm going to do my very best to try to explain what these do and how they are different from all other vaccines. And I hope I'm successful in sharing that with you. So the goal is to get the genetic recipe. Notice that word recipe, remember? RNA, order sheet, short order cook. You put that order sheet up, the short order cook takes it, then he takes the order sheet and throws it away. You want to get the genetic recipe for making a viral protein, in this case, the spike protein, into human cells, which can make the protein that the immune system can learn to react to. The mRNA recipes, there's that word again, can be delivered encapsulated in an oily membrane. which allows the mRNA to merge with the cell membrane. In other words, you've got to get this inside the cell to work, and they figured out a way to do that. Think about how amazing that is. Once inside, it is the cell, it is the cell, it is the cell that makes the protein. And in this case, it's the spike protein. Remember that spike protein? They made a vaccine that will cause your cells to make a spike protein, but not a virus. Now, a spike protein cannot replicate on its own, but it can act as an antigen. And if it can act as an antigen, your body can recognize it, mount an immune response, and guess what? You have immunity. And that's exactly what happens. The antigens are expressed on the cell surface. They are recognized by antibodies, and the antibodies go to work. And unfortunately, you get sick. So let me tell you something about these mRNA vaccines, which you may or may not know. They both have to be given in 2 doses. I believe the Moderna you have to give after 3 weeks and the Pfizer after 4 weeks, although that might be reversed. No matter, in almost all cases, you will get sick for a few days on this vaccine. So the question is, if you give out the first dose of the vaccine, how many people who get sick are going to come back for the second? And the problem is, if they don't get that second vaccine, they're not going to have immunity, certainly not sufficient immunity to ward off the virus. So there's a problem in the future, okay? And one of the coolest things about mRNA vaccines, if anything's cool in science, is that all you need to know is a genetic sequence of the recipe, and you can stick it in any recipe from any virus. So it's a way to rapidly get the vaccine out. And in a pandemic, look at, we did it in a year. Unprecedented, never happened before, but this is the future. And this is the future of vaccines, and it's good news. Hopefully it's good news. So here are the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. They are mRNA vaccines. They do not require cell culture to produce. They avoid contamination. They have an excellent short-term profile, 90 to 95% efficacy, which is excellent. They must be stored at cold temperatures. Hold on. They must be stored at cold temperatures. The Pfizer has to be stored on something like dry ice temperatures. Moderna, just a refrigerator. And the Pfizer vaccine is already in the country. There was a trip from Brussels to Chicago recently. They both applied for FDA authorization. Once authorized, it should be available for immediate distribution. And they have already ruled that healthcare workers and nursing home patients will be the first to get the vaccine. A little bit about clinical trials. I'm going to go through this quickly. Phase 1 is for safety, phase 2 for effectiveness, and phase 3 is this drug more effective than placebo? These are much larger studies. For Pfizer and Moderna, it's about 30,000 people. They're chosen at random. You know, sometime in a talk, you're going to make a slip. So there you go. They employ placebos. What's a placebo? Well, like a sugar pill, but not a sugar pill because you taste a sugar pill, right? But something that's inactive so they can see what happens if you think you're getting a vaccine, but you don't. So they might give you, for instance, some other vaccine. So you have a vaccine reaction. And so you're going to think you got the vaccine even though you didn't. The whole idea is to eliminate bias. You want to eliminate bias because if the people doing it know what's going on, well, they're going to be rooting for their drug, right? If the patients, they're probably going to do the same thing. And then you've got the human element out of it. You want to take that out. All right. So we talked about double-blind study. I'm going to move on. The next step is peer review. So before a drug or vaccine can be brought to market, the data must be made available so that the reputable scientists or physician scientists can study the data. Once that is done, the study is published in a major medical journal, so it can be reviewed by the broader scientific and medical community, you know, like people like me. That's not occurred with any of the vaccine candidates so far. There are also governmental agencies that oversee the process and report these findings to the public. And one that you probably haven't heard about is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, where they have 30,000 events reported every year, and 10 to 15% of these reports from vaccines describe serious medical events that result in hospitalization, life-threatening illness, disability, or death. Very briefly, the virus that we have today is not the virus that originated in China. This virus has mutated. Here's a graph that shows the original D614 virus, has been replaced by the G614 virus. What is the difference and why does the G614 do so well? And why is it almost completely displaced the D614? Well, here's the bad news, okay? It is more contagious than the original virus, about 6 to 10 times more contagious. And so that actually explains why we're in a whole lot of trouble right now, because whereas we had mainly this D614 to deal with early on, we're now dealing with this even more contagious virus now. All right, long COVID, I'm going to mention it briefly. Some people have this disease for a very long time. I have many in my clinic. It's unfortunate. The one thing they have in common is they usually present with multiple symptoms. And we'll move on. Some closing thoughts, okay? And a little bit more personal, my own thoughts. We all tend to get absorbed in our own lives, but there are many, many people suffering out there. The pandemic has been a heavy toll for people who live alone, people who don't have families, and people who are simply out of touch. Even though we can't or shouldn't congregate and have a traditional holiday season, that does not mean that we should forget those who are less fortunate than us. A simple phone call may be enough to save a life. It can certainly brighten up the day. We all need to feel connected, and we should never forget that. Look in your Rolodex, if you have one. Look in your contact list. Make a phone call, reminisce, tell a joke, commiserate if you must. It's my experience that the people who are suffering the most are easily overlooked. They are quiet. They are isolated. They feel hopeless. Some of them are no longer with us, and not because they were infected with the virus. We all need each other, and we all need to count our blessings. As the night gets long and the days get cold, I hope you will open up your heart to those who desperately need you. If you are feeling helpless because the pandemic seems it will never end, you are not helpless when it comes to reaching out to other people. And well, Disneyland, so that must be the end, except, oh yeah, Disneyland is closed, but I think that is the end. These are some references, and here's the Tree of Life, and I am officially done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schlesselberg. Do you want to stop? Yeah, great. Do you have time for just a couple of quick questions? Because I have some in the chat. One is, we've heard recently that the minks are contracting COVID. What do we know about our pets becoming vectors?
I don't have any minks. I don't know. I guess the minks
How about
our
dogs?
industry is probably out of business, although I think they've been out of business already.
Dogs
I haven't
or
heard
cats?
about cats and dogs getting it, so but I just don't know.
Okay.
I'm not a veterinarian, but haven't heard of any cats getting sick or dogs.
Okay, good. And then there's a question that if the virus mutates, which it obviously has done, how effective is the vaccine? I mean, what if this particular one mutates again? Is the vaccine going to be effective against the mutation?
Well, whoever asked that question is very smart. I like that
Gilman.
question.
Marcia Gilman.
And what's that?
Marcia Gilman.
All right, Marcia, you're smart. That's a great question to ask. You don't hear about that, do you? Okay. And I'll just say it's a great question to ask. It's a valid question. And there's not a lot of data out right now about how much more the virus is mutating. I've looked. It's going to mutate. Influenza mutates. That's why we have to get a new vaccine every year. So think about it. If they put this vaccine out, do you think everybody's going to get it? Have you talked to your friends? I talk to my friends. I talk to my relatives. I also talk to other physicians. I can tell you, not everybody's going to get it. Not only that, even those people who do get it, after they experience the side effects from the first dose, a lot of those people are not going to come back. They're just not going to want to put up with it. So the vaccine, which is a hopeful thing for us, may not do for us what we'd like, which is to eradicate this virus. We'll see. It's going to be an interesting social experiment to see how it's introduced and how well accepted it is.
But you're saying
Rabbi,
that,
may I ask a question?
can you hang on just 1 second, please? Just 1 second, because I've got another question in the chat here that was put in. Please hang on. So you're saying
Rabbi,
that,
excuse me, may I ask a question?
can you just wait just 1 minute, please? there's some other questions in the chat that I want to get to, okay? And then I'll get to you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying that if the virus does mutate, we might need another vaccine for the mutated version.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
So then somebody has a very long thing in here, but basically that a lot of the biomedical studies claiming that a drug or treatment is beneficial have turned out not to be true. And so that, I guess the question is about, she said dexamethasone. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Dexamethasone.
Yeah, thank you. False positives and exaggerated results in peer-reviewed scientific studies have reached epidemic proportions. Any comment about that?
Well, what am I going to say? Dexamethasone works. I've seen it work. It is very effective in helping people. The death rate from this disease is markedly lower than before. I attribute that to dexamethasone. Are you going to find scientific literature that says the opposite? Yes. But you have to look at everything critically. And not all scientific research is all that helpful. So just because you found a reference doesn't help me. I use dexamethasone and I've seen what it does for people. It keeps them off the ventilator. It's estimated that cuts down on deaths probably by 1/3. That's pretty impressive. So I'll be happy to look at the study. You know, it's kind of hard. You have some study and anyone can pull up a study and say, what do you think of this? To really discuss the study, you have to look at it. How was it designed? Was it designed to fail? You know, some studies are so poorly designed, I could tell you what the outcome's going to be. So anyway, if they're that interested, I'll be happy to look on it and critique it on a one-to-one basis. But no, I think dexamethasone is a tremendous breakthrough. It is cheap, it's effective, and it saves lives.
Great, thank you. Okay, Susie, go ahead.
Doctor, I was diagnosed with, my name is Suzanne Kopel. I was diagnosed with the virus on April 23rd. I'm 87 years old. I was home. Luckily, it did not affect my lungs. I did not have a cold. I did run a fever and I was extremely weak. My legs ached, my body ached. And I've had 3 bouts of cancer. And it took a while. It took a month to 6 weeks to recuperate. Am I still immune from catching it again?
So you're asking a medical question. I am not your doctor, and therefore I really can't answer that question. If you want to see me in consultation, I'll do a thorough evaluation and give you an answer to your question.
And should I take the vaccine when it's available?
Okay, so that's a question for everybody. Should you take the vaccine? I'm going to answer it this way. The data from the vaccine has not been published yet. In my world, which is a scientific world, I look at the data. I use my medical background to evaluate the data, and based on the data, I make my decisions. So I can tell you as of today, without a published paper, I do not have an opinion one way or another.
There's another question about the vaccine, actually, which is interesting, which is, do you need to quarantine when you get the vaccine? Because you said that you do develop some symptoms or you get ill. So do you have to quarantine for like 2 weeks after you get the first dose?
Okay, so the question is, when you get the vaccine, do you have to quarantine? And the answer is, well, the answer is you should quarantine if you're infected with the virus, okay? If you're infected with the virus, you should not be getting a vaccine. Will people who are infected get a vaccine? It's an interesting question, but the vaccine itself does not make you a danger to others. Why? Because the only thing these mRNA vaccines will do is to cause your body to make the viral proteins. That's a little part of the virus, okay? That part of the virus will make you a little sick, but it will not replicate. It is not a viral infection. You pose no danger to others from the vaccine. But if you're one of those people vaccinated who also happens to be sick, you should quarantine, but not for the reason of getting the vaccine, okay?
Right. All right, and then someone asked if we're going to have multiple vaccines being offered. How do you choose which one to take?
The answer is yes, we're going to have multiple vaccines. AstraZeneca has already been approved in the UK. It's a different kind of vaccine. I didn't want to overwhelm people with too much. There's a lot of information out there. There's a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The answer would be maybe another talk to review the studies that are published and the pros and cons. As I said before, as of this date, there's no published data, only newspaper reports. And I never make, well, never, big word. I don't, if I have a choice, I don't make decisions based on newspaper accounts or people on a podium or that kind of thing. I want to look at the data and evaluate it for myself. I hope that's not unsatisfactory to you. But again, if there's interest and you want me back, I'll do the best job I can of explaining to you the differences in these vaccines. I will tell you that both AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson's had to have their trials stopped because of serious side effects, but I believe they were not from the vaccine. So it's not just crystal clear out there what's going to pan out to be the best choice. But it's kind of an involved thing. I mean, if you kind of understood everything about the mRNA vaccines, then I can move on to AstraZeneca as a DNA vaccine. But if you're not quite there, then really invite me back and we'll go through them in a little bit more detail and spend a little bit more time so you can kind of, get a handle on it.
So you said that before the vaccines can really be released, they have to be peer reviewed. And yet they're talking about releasing them in December and starting to inoculate people. So I'm wondering how that is going to work.
So the FDA will review it on its own. I assume usually, in my world, you get peer-reviewed data. That's it's like reading the newspaper every day. You expect the newspaper to come out. I expect to see articles in a journal. Is it possible it could be released without us seeing it? Well, in 2020, I will say this: anything is possible. Anything is possible. So yes, it could be released without peer review, but I would think that the medical community and the scientific community would squawk at not having the data. But it may happen. Of course, there's some urgency to it, so I can't completely fault them. There's been a lot of things that happened this year that's never happened, at least in my lifetime. So yeah, anything's possible.
Okay. One last question. Does somebody have a last question to ask?
Rabbi, I hope I do.
Okay, Ezra, go ahead.
All right, actually, the two quick questions, I hope. One is, do you discount reports that the virus came from a lab in China?
That's a strange, is that a double negative? Do I discount reports? I'm sorry, what is the question again?
I think he's asking if you think it's possible that the virus was released from a lab in China rather than from a bat.
Well, it's not in my slides, but in 2013, the virology lab in Wuhan released a paper where they were studying SARS viruses from bats. Okay, so they were growing this kind of a virus in the laboratory in Wuhan. I can show you the paper. I haven't been to China recently. I don't know what's gone on there, and I don't discount it if that's what you want. It's kind of a double negative. I think there's lots of evidence to show that it's from it, but it's not really a medical question, is it? It's more of a, I don't know, quasi international thing. But it seems like it came from China, but I've heard otherwise, so I don't know.
But I guess the question Ezra is asking is whether or not you think it was developed as a, weapon, right? Ezra, is that what you're asking?
Well, it could very well have been an accident that it was released, but that it was developed in a lab and animals played no role in it at all.
No, animals played a role in it. I mean, it's a zoonotic virus. I'll answer you this way. I listened to a podcast called This Week in Virology. It is with a group of virologists who are much smarter than me in the field. And there is a population of scientists that believe that this could have been accidentally released in a lab. I've not heard any scientists that believe this was released as a weapon. Think about it. If it was used as a biological weapon, it's pretty messy because lots of people died in China. it didn't help China, right? I mean, what would the advantage?
Exactly. It's why it may have been an accident.
But yes, I have heard that from people that are more familiar than I am. And there are ways of studying this. You know, they can look at, just like you can see someone's face, they can look at the genome of a virus and tell where it's gone and where it's traveled to. And in the prior talk, I actually showed a very beautiful animation of how this virus traveled. They were able to find it. So the answer's out there. As far as how this happened, no matter what, it's very unfortunate. So many casualties. It's awful. But I don't pretend to know things that I couldn't possibly know. I don't know.
All right. My other question is this. My doctor, I asked him when I had my recent checkup, would he prescribe hydroxychloroquine with zinc for those who had symptoms of COVID? And he said they would not, that you'd have to go to the hospital before they would give you anything. And is that your understanding?
You really want me to talk about hydroxychloroquine? That is a football. That is a bomb. That is a whatever you want to use. It's a red pepper. So I will answer you this way. I have never personally prescribed hydroxychloroquine, but I have early on, I had patients in the hospital who had hydroxychloroquine prescribed. There are many doctors who in their practice give hydroxychloroquine. There is a group of doctors, and if you're interested, I can give you not only the group, but I have their 200-page research compendium supporting its use. But for those 200 pages, there are 200 pages not supporting its use. But let me finish. I really don't like talking about this, and I hope you can understand why, but you're forcing me to. The mechanism of hydroxychloroquine that's proposed is that it lets zinc into the cell. When something lets something into the cell, they call it an ionophore. Lots of fancy words in medicine. If that drug were to work, do you remember we showed you the incubation phase and then the symptomatic phase and the later phases? If it were to work, it would work in the incubation stage and maybe early on in the symptoms. Once you're in the hospital, it's too late to use a medicine that interrupts viral replication. And the one thing that did disturb me, because I looked at the articles, most of the studies that were published, and they were all negative, were all done on hospitalized patients. But I looked at those studies and I said, well, yeah, I wouldn't expect it to work in a hospitalized patient. It's too late. As far as the rest of the data, if you want it, I'll give you the 200 pages and you can look through it yourself and judge for yourself. But again, it's a hot topic. I'd like to stay away from it. Obviously, I can't. And so that's my answer.
Well, I'm gonna.
That's exactly what I had heard, Doctor.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask us to not ask any more questions right now because Dr. Schlesselberg has given us an hour and a half of his time when I know that you might have to be running to the hospital and taking care of your patients.
You know what? I'm very happy to stay here longer if you want me to. The only thing that would pull me away is I do have a patient that's gone to the hospital. If I get a call from them, I have to stop. So it's up to you.
All right. If you
Can I
want to be
ask
generous
one
enough.
question? I just wondered, Dr. Fauci was the one who stated that if the vaccine comes out, he will take it. That's something that he stated, which seems, and we've heard back and forth, should we take this vaccine, that vaccine? I think he's talking about the ones that will be approved. Do you think that's valid?
Well, Dr. Fauci is a public figure, very prominent and very influential. And I think he's trying to use his influence to help people. My decision will be made based on reading the medical literature, just like I said, and no other way. And I have asked people, will you follow Dr. Fauci? In my world, I look at the medicine and the science and I make my own decisions, and that's just the way I make it. If that results in a lot of people getting vaccinated and the vaccine turns out to be helpful, then he's done a great public service.
Right.
By the way,
Most of us don't have your background, so we listen to what we hope are the experts.
Absolutely.
I did have a question from somebody. One of our congregants actually has tested positive and had asked a question this morning that I didn't want to share with you because I knew that you'd already prepared your talk. But now that you're taking questions, he wanted to know about self-care at home if you find that you are positive.
Well, it depends how symptomatic. I'll assume it's a very mild case. In order to quarantine, you should be in your own room and everybody should take precautions. You should use your own bathroom. You should not share it with anyone since it can be spread that way. I'm not sure what else you'd like me to address about self-quarantining. It's just self-quarantining.
Well, it was just self-care, not so much self-quarantining, but you know, anything in particular that they should be doing. If that person wants to, ask the question to me privately in the chat, go ahead. And if you have more detail, I don't want to necessarily say who has it. So if you want to go ahead, please do that in the chat. And in the meantime, there's a question about, did you see the article about the timeline of the virus and the so-called second wave of the virus in the person infected? Why days 5 to 10 are so important when you have coronavirus? And there's an article that was put in the chat, but I don't know what the article, it's a New York Times article about the virus.
I'll be more than happy to review the article and give you a reaction, but I have not yet read the New York Times.
All right, I'll send you the.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Please, Martha.
Yes. When they are reporting on or studying the efficacy of the vaccines, I have a question about what they look for. In other words, are they looking for antibody development in people who have taken it, or the amount of antibody? Are they looking just for infection? And of course, do they have any data on the behaviors of the people that have been vaccinated, comparing groups that are relatively isolated from those who are not, which could greatly affect how efficacious the vaccine might look?
I can tell you what I know. That's all I can tell you. They look to see who got sick and who didn't. I don't know that they checked. Well, I know this. For the two viruses, the mRNA viruses, they did not check to see who was still contagious. So they didn't culture them. They looked for symptoms. They looked to see who got sick and who didn't get sick. That's their endpoints.
Okay.
AstraZeneca went a step further because, see, the thing is this. Question is, if you get a vaccine, can you still spread the virus, right? In other words, let's say you're vaccinated. It doesn't prevent you from getting this very contagious virus from someone else, and it's growing. And even though you're immune to it, can you still spread it to other people? AstraZeneca looked at that, and they had some good data on that. Specifically, the Moderna and Pfizer did not study that. And the only reason why I know that is this, I do listen to this podcast with these virologists, and they did discuss that. There were many parts of that question. Was there some other part that you wanted me to talk about?
Well, I guess, the other factors, and I guess you can't certainly control everything or even identify all the parameters, but it looks to me like if large portions of the people that did get vaccinated were very careful about their behaviors and really, stayed home a lot, and the other portion was more out there. I mean, how random is this sample? Do they even know?
You're very smart. It's a great question. And you noticed I kind of went through the phase 1, 2, 3 because the time was going overboard, and I didn't want to have an hour and a half talk because that's when people start running away from me. Everything, in order for a double-blind study to be valid, everything possible has to be done to make sure that it's random. And in the case of these two vaccines, they had 30,000 people. And so your question is excellent. And the question is, well, were the people who got the vaccine very careful? And that's why they did so well? And the other people weren't careful? By randomizing and making sure nobody knows who's who, they try to eliminate that kind of bias from it. But you'd be a very good reviewer for scientific papers. I think maybe that's another second career for you because
Well,
those are exactly the
teaches.
kind of questions.
She teaches biology, right? So,
Anatomy and physiology, yeah.
Well, we have some very, very smart people here. That's
yes,
an
we
excellent
do.
question.
So there's a question about if you only get one dose of the vaccine, are you at all protected? You know, what does it do any good to just get one?
My understanding is no, it does not do any good to get one. You really do need that second, that second dose. Again, how would you get the best information when they publish their data? I don't have any of that. So
Right.
my understanding is you need, for these vaccines, you need 2 doses. There is a vaccine where you only need 1 dose, but it's not currently available to the public.
Okay, so the question that had to do with the New York Times said that it says that some people feel better than crash after 5 to 10 days, that marking on the calendar when you first get symptoms, so you can be especially careful at the 5 to 10 days after symptoms. Does that sound right, that it's worse 5 to 10 days into being infected?
If you have symptoms, you need to be quarantined, whether it's 5 or 10 days. I'm not sure.
Does it get, no, I guess the question is, does it get worse at about 5 days?
Yeah, it does tend to get worse with people. Some people, they kind of slide through it, and a lot of people, most of whom are my patients, as I said, I just got a call from a patient I've been following every day for a week, and finally it became too much. So you see both. You see people spontaneously recover, and you see people go downhill gradually, and it becomes a very serious illness. So nobody wants to go to the hospital. You have to make that call, and unfortunately, with a lot of my patients, they do end up going. So that's just the way it goes. Only thing I can do is call them every day and see how they're doing. And if it sounds like their symptoms are progressing and they need more help, especially if they have any signs of shortness of breath, then yes, I immediately send them to the hospital, and they almost always get admitted.
Are there any final questions? Somebody want to unmute and ask?
Have you read The Stand?
What?
Stephen King wrote a book called The Stand, which parallels what we're seeing today in some senses.
I'll put it on my reading list.
Yeah, really, for when you have spare time, which this gentleman does not have, because I don't think he sleeps more than 2 hours a night.
I have a
And
question.
we really appreciate what he's done. I do have a question though about concern about the fact that both Pfizer and Moderna need to be kept at such cold temperatures. How do we ensure, and yes, we should all be trusting, I guess, but how do we ensure that the vaccine that you're going to get was not accidentally, or in other words, that somebody didn't keep it at those temperatures?
Is that the biology teacher again?
No, this is a different smart person. She asked the first smart question.
Another smart question. So, well, you said we should trust. I don't think you should trust anything, frankly. I see a lot of human error all over the place. It's a great question. Of the 2 vaccines, Moderna can be stored in a regular refrigerator, whereas Pfizer vaccine requires very severe refrigeration. If you put that vaccine in a refrigerator, 6 days after you put it in there, it's worthless. So you're absolutely right. It creates a major problem in distribution. But there is a lot of money behind these vaccines, a tremendous amount. And you have the military involved, at least in this country. And so you can imagine that appropriate actions are going to be taken, that they have looked at this and planned for it. And I do think that we are very well set to distribute this vaccine or vaccines when they become available, when they become approved. But no, you can't trust anyone. You can't give anyone your trust. You should question. These questions are excellent. It shows that you're intelligent, bright, and asking it. And it's questions like this that will keep you safe, because if people question enough, then you'll get answers. And if people that are out there know that there are people like you, they're going to be motivated to make sure that you do not get a dud vaccine. But are there going to be human errors? Unfortunately, anything that involves humans is going to involve human error, almost anything. Even the first moon launch almost never survived because the computer that they had designed way beyond anyone's imagination failed right before they landed on the moon. And yeah, if you want to see a story that's worth telling, listen to the story of how Apollo 11 almost didn't make it to the moon. It's true. So yeah, I don't know. You know, trust and verify. I think that's fine. Your questions are excellent, and keep them coming. Those are great.
I have a question. If you get the vaccine, the first dose, and then it's a 3 to 4 weeks before you get the next dose, is that correct?
Correct.
So in the meantime, you still are not covered. So you still have to stay masked and everything. You're not protected.
I have some news for you and everybody else. Long after you're vaccinated, you will still need to wear a mask and you'll still need to socially distance. Okay? Why? Just the way that the government is handling this, the way people are handling this. I don't think people are going to accept certain people walking around without masks and not. And who's going to believe you when you say you've been vaccinated?
Well, it's only 90 to 95%. So you might be the 5 to 10% that it didn't work on.
One more thing about that, again, with these vaccines, the 5 or 10% that it didn't work on, they had mild illness. None of these people ended up sick in the hospital. So everybody benefited. It's 100% benefit. But
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
But no, I don't think you're going to be able to walk out in the street and show your vaccine card and people are going to say, you know, it's just human nature. People are going to say, why should I wear a mask when you don't have to? And that's just, I'm okay with being wrong, but that's what I think is going to happen.
So it's a social reason, not a medical reason.
Social reason, yes.
Okay. Listen, you've been incredibly generous with your knowledge and your time. Once again, we're very grateful. We've gotten some very nice comments in the chat, thanking you and praising the session. And
Thank you so much.
yes, and we
You're more than
will, I'm
welcome.
sure, ask you
Thank
to
you.
come
Thank
again.
you.
Very
Thank you.
appreciative. Thank you very much.
And we'll want
Yes.
you to come again.
Absolutely.
We'd like those charts too. Those were helpful.
Yeah, if you would email me the charts, we can make them available maybe in the weekly
Yeah.
email.
I'd be more than happy to. Look, if there's anything that I can do, I'm more than happy to do it. If there's strictly medical issues, then that deserves kind of a personal, in-depth evaluation. I can't really make general comments, but I'm more than happy to reach out and help anyone who needs the help.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.